My in-laws thought they ran our lives. For 3 years, I let them think that. But when they tried to control the one thing that mattered most, I finally set a boundary that made them realize they were never in charge to begin with. I married my husband Mark when I was 26. He was 28, a civil engineer with kind eyes and a way of staying calm that I desperately needed because I am not a calm person. I'm a high school biology teacher, and if you've ever spent a day with 30 teenagers dissecting frogs, you know that patience is a learned skill. I'm still learning. Mark's parents, Richard and Diane, lived 20 minutes away in the same suburb of Columbus, where Mark grew up. They were the kind of people who had opinions about everything, not just opinions, convictions. The right way to load a dishwasher, the right way to fold towels, the right way to celebrate holidays, the right way to live. Early on, I thought they were just helpful. When we bought our first house, a small 3-bedroom ranch with a backyard that needed serious work, Diane showed up with paint swatches and a list of contractors. Richard brought his tool belt and opinions about our electrical panel. I smiled and said thank you because I was 26, newly married, and desperate for them to like me. And honestly, I did like them. Diane had a sharp sense of humor when she wasn't being overbearing. Richard could be genuinely generous. He once surprised us with a new lawnmower when he saw me struggling with our broken one. But their generosity always came with strings. Thin, nearly invisible strings that you didn't notice until you tried to move. The first real conflict was about our wedding. Mark and I wanted a small ceremony at a local garden with maybe 50 people. Diane wanted 200 at a country club. She cried when we said no, actually cried. Mark held firm because he'd been dealing with this his whole life, but I saw the toll it took on him. The guilt, the exhaustion. We compromised on 80 people at a different venue, and Diane acted like she'd won a major victory. That set the pattern. Every holiday, every vacation, every major decision became a negotiation we didn't ask for. Thanksgiving was always at their house, never ours. Christmas morning was for them, not for us, to start our own traditions. When we talked about getting a dog, Diane showed up with a breeder's business card and a lecture about why rescues were too unpredictable. I told myself it was fine, that they meant well. That family was complicated and you picked your battles. Then I got pregnant. The pregnancy wasn't planned, but we were thrilled. Mark cried when the test came back positive. I cried. We spent a weekend talking about names and painting the spare room in our heads. But the moment we told Richard and Diane, something shifted. Diane grabbed my hands across their dining room table and looked at me with these watery, fever-bright eyes. Oh, honey, this is going to be wonderful. We're going to be so involved. I should have paid attention to the way she said involved. Over the next 7 months, Diane became a constant presence. She came to doctor's appointments without being asked. She showed up at our house with suggestions for the nursery, which were really just demands delivered in a sweet voice. She bought a crib without asking and had it delivered to our house, then acted hurt when I said we already picked one out. But this one is safer, she said. I did the research. Mark tried to talk to her, he really did. But every conversation ended with Diane and Richard calling Mark ungrateful. Your mother just wants to help, Richard would say. You don't know how lucky you are. The breaking point came when I was 36 weeks pregnant. I was huge, uncomfortable, exhausted from teaching and grading papers and trying to keep our house from looking like a disaster zone. Diane came over on a Saturday while Mark was at a work thing, and she sat me down on my own couch and told me her plan. I've already cleared it with my boss, she said, pulling out a calendar. I'm taking 6 weeks of leave starting the day you go into labor. I'll stay in your guest room. I can handle nights so you can sleep, and I'll make sure you're eating right. Richard will bring dinner 3 times a week. I stared at her. You're going to stay with us? Of course. You'll need help. Mark has to work, and you can't do it alone. I opened my mouth to say something about how I hadn't asked for help, how maybe we wanted that time as a new family, how maybe having my mother-in-law living in my house for 6 weeks sounded like a nightmare. But Diane kept talking. She had a whole schedule planned. Feeding times, nap schedules, pediatrician visits. When she finally stopped for breath, I said, Diane, I really appreciate this, but we haven't talked about it. Mark and I need to decide what postpartum looks like for us. Her smile froze. What's there to decide? You need help, and we might want help. But we might want to do it alone for a while. Just the 3 of us. She blinked and suggested something obscene. You think you can handle a newborn by yourselves? People do it all the time. People with no support system, she said. But you have us. Why would you refuse help? I didn't have the energy to argue. I said we'd talk about it later and changed the subject. She left an hour later, stiff and cool, and I spent the rest of the day crying in the nursery because I was hormonal and scared, and already exhausted by a battle I hadn't even started yet. When Mark got home, I told him everything. He sat on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands for a long time. Then he said, I'll handle it. How? I'll tell her no, firmly. I wanted to believe him. But I'd seen him try to be firm with his mother before. It never worked, she cried, Richard called, and Mark folded. Not because he was weak, but because he was conditioned. 30 years of guilt is hard to shake. Our daughter Lily was born on a Tuesday in October, 6 pounds, 11 ounces, screaming and perfect. The moment they placed her on my chest, I felt something click into place. A fierce, primal thing that said I would burn down the world for this child. That everything Diane had done, every overstep and boundary cross, was nothing compared to what I would do to protect my daughter. I didn't realize how quickly that would be tested. Diane showed up at the hospital an hour after Lily was born. She didn't call first. She didn't text. She just walked into my recovery room while I was half-naked, trying to breastfeed, and immediately reached for the baby. "Oh, give her to me. You need rest." Mark intercepted, gently. "Mom, maybe give them a minute." "A minute? I've been waiting in the waiting room for an hour." Her voice had an edge. "I just want to hold my granddaughter." I pulled Lily closer to my chest. "You can hold her in a little while. I'm feeding her." Diane's eyes swept over me. The hospital gown, the tangled hair, the dark circles. I could see her making judgments. She stepped back but didn't leave. She pulled up a chair and sat down, and she stayed for 4 hours. 4 hours. She made phone calls from the chair. She criticized the hospital's lactation consultant. She told Mark he looked tired and should let her handle things. When we were discharged, she followed us home, literally followed us, her car behind ours the whole way. She pulled into our driveway behind Mark's truck and got out with a bag that clearly meant she planned to stay. Mark said, "Mom, we talked about this." "Talked about what?" "You staying with us." "We said we wanted the first week alone." Diane looked at him like he'd slapped her. "You never said that to me." "Yes, I did, twice." "Well, I don't remember that." She turned to me, and her voice went soft and wounded. "I'm just trying to help. You don't know what you're doing. You've never had a baby before." I was standing in my own driveway, holding my 2-day-old daughter, wearing sweatpants that didn't quite fit, and a shirt stained with spit up. I was exhausted. I was in pain. And I was so tired of Diane acting like I was incompetent. "Diane," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. "I appreciate the offer, but we need this time, just the 3 of us. If we need help, we will ask, but right now I need you to go home." She stared at me. Mark stared at me. I think even Lily stopped breathing for a second. Then Diane's face crumpled. Not fake tears, real ones. Hurt and confusion and something that looked like betrayal. She looked at Mark. "Are you going to let her talk to me like that?" Mark put his hand on my lower back. "Mom, please. Just give us a few days." She didn't say anything else. She got back in her car and drove away. And I walked into my house, locked the door, and burst into tears. Because even though I'd done the right thing, it felt terrible. That was the first boundary. It got worse before it got better. Diane didn't speak to us for 4 days. Then she called Mark at work, crying, saying I had humiliated her in front of the neighbors. The neighbors weren't even outside. She said I was keeping her from her granddaughter. She said she had never been so disrespected in her life. Richard called Mark that night. "Your mother is heartbroken. She just wants to love that baby. You need to fix this." Mark came to bed late, looking hollowed out. "They want us to come over for dinner on Sunday." To talk. To talk about what? There's nothing to talk about. I set a boundary. She needs to respect it. I know. But maybe if we just go and let her hold Lily for a while, she'll calm down. I understood why he was saying that. I really did. He was trying to keep the peace the way he had his whole life. But I was different now. I had a daughter, and I would not teach her that love meant surrendering your boundaries to keep other people comfortable. "We can go to dinner," I said. "But if she brings up staying with us or starts criticizing how we're parenting, we leave. Immediately. No arguing, no negotiating. We just leave." Mark agreed. Like he was grateful someone else was holding the line for once. Dinner was awkward. Diane was overly sweet, the kind of sweet that feels like a trap. She held Lily for 2 hours and barely let me feed her. She made comments about how I was still holding on to baby weight and how Mark looked exhausted from doing everything. I bit my tongue because Lily was calm and fed and we were almost through the meal. Then Diane said, "I've been thinking, when you go back to work in the spring, I'll quit my job and watch Lily full-time. That way she's with family, and you don't have to pay for daycare." I set my fork down. We already enrolled her in a daycare. "A daycare?" Diane's voice went sharp. "You're putting my granddaughter in a daycare? It's a great daycare. It's 2 blocks from the school where I teach. I can visit her on my lunch break. But she needs family, she needs me. Daycares are full of strangers and germs and God knows what else." Diane looked at Mark. "You can't be okay with this." Mark glanced at me. I could see him wavering, the old guilt rising up. But I squeezed his knee under the table and he said, "We already decided, Mom, it's a good daycare. We like it." Diane stood up so fast her chair nearly tipped over. "I can't believe this. I rearranged my whole life for this baby. I took leave from work so I could help you. And you're just going to hand her over to strangers?" "Diane, sit down," I said quietly. "Don't tell me to sit down in my own house." Her voice was shaking. "You have been difficult from the moment you married my son. You refused our help with the wedding. You refused our help with the house. And now you're refusing to let me be a grandmother?" I stood up too. I was holding Lily, who had started to fuss at the raised voices. "I'm not refusing to let you be a grandmother. I'm refusing to let you be a third parent. There's a difference. What does that even mean? It means we make the decisions for our daughter, not you. Where she goes to daycare, how we feed her, what her schedule looks like, those are our choices. You can be involved, but you can't be in charge." Diane looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Like the polite, smiling daughter-in-law she'd thought she could push around had just turned into someone she didn't recognize. Richard stood up too, trying to mediate. "Let's all just calm down." "Diane, sit. Maddie, maybe you're being a little harsh." I'm not being harsh, I'm being clear, and we're leaving now because we said we would if this happened. I walked toward the door. Mark grabbed the diaper bag and followed. Diane started crying. Loud theatrical sobs that echoed through the house. You're taking my granddaughter away from me. That's what you're doing. I stopped at the front door. I turned around and I looked at her. This woman who had tried to control everything from my wedding to my nursery to my postpartum recovery. This woman who thought love meant ownership. Diane, I said, I'm not taking your granddaughter anywhere. But if you keep acting like this, you won't see her until you learn to respect us as parents. That's not a threat. That's a promise. We left. For 3 weeks, we didn't see them. Diane sent texts, long rambling, alternating between apologetic and accusatory. Richard called Mark every few days to say Diane was depressed and couldn't sleep, and could Mark please just come over so she could see the baby. Mark held firm. I was proud of him. It was harder than anything we'd done in our marriage, but we were a team in a way we hadn't been before. Being parents had clarified something for both of us. We weren't just Mark and Maddie anymore. We were Lily's protection. Finally, Diane called me directly. Not Mark. Me. She said. I want to apologize. I've been thinking about what you said, and I think I got carried away. I just love her so much. I waited. Because I knew there was more, but I don't understand why you won't let me watch her. I'm her grandmother. And there it was. The apology that wasn't really an apology. The boundary she still didn't understand. Diane, I said, I'm not going to argue with you. Here are my terms. You can see Lily twice a week for a few hours at a time at our house. You follow our rules about feeding, sleep, and screen time. If you criticize our parenting, the visit ends. If you show up uninvited, you don't get the next visit, and you will never, ever stay overnight in our house again. Silence. So long I thought she'd hung up. Then she said quietly, That's very strict. Yes, I said, it is. Because the last 3 years haven't been strict enough, and I'm done pretending that your feelings are more important than my family's peace. She agreed. Reluctantly, tearfully, but she agreed. And here's the part that still surprises me when I think about it. It worked. Not overnight. The first few visits were tense, Diane watching me like a hawk, waiting for me to slip up so she could prove I needed her. But I didn't slip. Mark backed me up every time. And slowly, something shifted. Diane stopped criticizing. She started asking instead of telling. She showed up with coffee for me, not just gifts for Lily. She apologized once, genuinely, for the hospital thing. I was just so excited, she said. I forgot you were excited too. I didn't forgive her completely. I'm not there yet. But I stopped being angry. Lily is 8 months old now. She's in daycare and thriving. Diane watches her one afternoon a week, and those afternoons go fine because she really knows, that the moment she oversteps, that privilege disappears. Richard calls me the family bulldog now, but he says it with respect. I think he's secretly glad someone finally drew a line with Diane. I think he's been exhausted for 30 years and didn't know how to say it. Mark and I are better than we've ever been. He told me last week that he never thought anyone would stand up to his mom for him. That he'd been doing it alone his whole life. My in-laws tried to control everything. They thought they had the right because they were family, because they loved us, because they knew better. But I set one boundary they didn't expect. I refused to let their love be a cage. And now we all get to be free.